Little lighting check. Sheesh. God damn. Oof. When I was in sixth form, which is basically in the UK, you have sixth form, which is the last 2 years of school that you do before you go off to university or work or whatever you choose to do. We were in sixth form and we were studying for our A levels quite a lot. And so A levels are basically the exams that you do in sixth form in order to dictate which uni you go to based on how good your grades are. And so we were revising for A levels. We took that seriously, but I was taking the gym very seriously in that time as well. I trained like a bodybuilder back then because I wanted to put on as much mass as possible onto my small, delicate frame. Because I've got thin bones, I've got a rather small frame, I've got quite pretty narrow clavicles, I've got small wrists, a small waist. So my whole skeletal frame was small, and so obviously I wanted to get as big as possible. And so I took the gym very seriously, and I would train like 3 to 5 days a week. And those workouts would usually be around 2+ hours, usually around 2 hours. It varied a little bit. Like the minimum I would do was for a workout was like an hour and a half. The maximum I'd do was probably like 2 hours and 30 minutes. But anyways, at the same time, we were revising for our A levels, and I'd spend 2 hours and 15 minutes commuting daily to and from school. So naturally, I didn't have that much time in the day for much else. 2 hours and 15 fucking minutes every day, sweating my balls off in the same uniform, worn 5 days back to back in the same week, all for buying train tickets and, well, being on the train and, preparing for school and all that shit. Yeah, I really enjoyed my time at sixth form. Best years of my life, bruv. So that's a lot of time that could have been spent elsewhere. When I'd get back home, I'd revise a bit, I'd hit the gym for like 2+ hours, and the last thing I'd want to think about is having to meal prep for the following day at school. At school, 90% of the time, I'd usually be eating Greek style yogurt mixed with honey. I'd vary between full fat and low fat, cashew nuts, almonds, protein shakes, and protein bars. And so that's basically all I ate at school. I never really ate meat at school. I never really meal prepped because I didn't have the time for that shit. Some days might bring in a sandwich made from home, with some chicken breast inside, some cheese, barbecue sauce, the basic Noel Dazel recipe. Shout out to Noel Dazel. Made it a lot easier for me to gain muscle. Shout out to him and his recipes. They tasted good, that's for sure. But 90% of the time, I just bought things which I wouldn't have to meal prep. And I'd just bring them to school and I'd just eat them during lunch. I'd usually spend my whole break time and lunchtime munching on those thingies. Sometimes I went to the local co-op and bought some cookies, when I was like, had nothing to eat. But I barely ate meat during the school hours, and that was more of like a home time thingy. And I remember the specific protein bars that I'd eat were from a company called Warrior, and I'd get mad bloating from them. I didn't just get mad bloating from them, I also had the most putrid, smelly farts you could imagine. I remember one day, before the last lesson of the day, we had computer science. That was the last lesson. And for lunch, right before that, one day I had 2 of these protein bars in salted caramel flavor and a 200-gram bag of roasted salted cashew nuts. Those were all from Asda. I bought them from Asda the day before for the lunchtime and the break time. And I had those 2 protein bars and the 200-gram bag of roasted salted cashew nuts. And I remember the exact protein bars were from a company called Warrior. And so they were like Warrior Raw salted caramel flapjacks. Yeah, those were the exact protein bars. So when we actually get to the lesson, halfway through the lesson, our teacher had asked us to move all of our chairs towards like the front of the class so that he could explain data structures to us clearly without having to overly raise his voice. And so like we were naturally all just bunched up together to make it more convenient for us to like chat to our friends, etc. And so we usually sat close together. But that lesson, I had the worst bloating I'd ever had in sixth form. I didn't even need to take a shit, but I needed to fart a bunch. I was bloated as hell. And so when we were at the front of the class, I really needed to let one rip. And so obviously I did do it because I can't keep that gas in my stomach for so long. Otherwise it will become extra explosive. You know guys what I'm talking about. Like you have to hold in your farts and then the gases build up and then like suddenly like it becomes extra explosive like a couple minutes later. 30 minutes later after you're holding your farts, bruv, it goes from like you might need it to just go like a little once, but like 30 minutes later you might have holded that small one in and it's like so I needed to let it rip, and so obviously I did. It was a silent one, but it was so potent, it was so eggy and salty that I basically baited myself out in the classroom. The kids behind me were already covering their faces with their blazers because the stench was so bad. And so I knew that I needed to stop eating these protein bars. But the question is, why did these protein bars cause my insides to cook up one of the most potent, putrid, smelly farts? Why did these protein bars cook up the most potent of gases fathomable to the average sixth former? Well, the ingredients of the protein bars were as follows: rolled oats, toasted oats, so that means you got honey, barley malt extract, sugar, and vegetable oil. You got protein blend, which is basically just milk protein and hydrolyzed gelatin. Glycerin, fructo-oligosaccharide, which is the culprit behind all of this. And so we'll get to that in a second. Cocoa powder, chocolate chips, so sugar, cocoa mass, cocoa butter, and soy lecithin as an emulsifier. Salt, sweetener, so stevia and sucralose. And then we have the flavorings. And so looking at these ingredients, you'll obviously see some names that you've likely never come across. And culprit of today is going to be the fructo-oligosaccharides in the protein bars. So what are fructo-oligosaccharides? Well, fructo-oligosaccharides are a form of carbohydrate. And so you'll commonly see such ingredients. You will commonly see fructo-oligosaccharides in foods where weight management is a crucial part of the actual product. There's a reason they put those in, because fructo-oligosaccharides are sweeteners. So these protein bars I ate are designed for low-calorie diets, and so obviously the manufacturers aren't allowed to put sugars inside the protein bars. Otherwise, the protein bars will end up having too many calories inside them. And so these companies use alternative sweeteners instead of sugar. These protein bars are designed for weight cutting usually. Usually you won't really come across protein bars for bulking, because most people that start fitness, they do so because they usually want to lose weight. And so since these protein bars are designed for low-calorie diets, the manufacturers do not put sugar inside the bars. Otherwise, the caloric content of the bars would be far too high to meet the caloric deficit in which the consumers need to put themselves in. And so instead of using sugars, they use alternative sweeteners. One of those being the fructo-oligosaccharides. Since the fructo-oligosaccharides, they carry less calories than sugar, and unlike real sugar, they don't actually cause spikes in blood sugar levels once they are consumed. And so why does this specific ingredient cause bloating? Well, because fructo-oligosaccharides, they are osmotically active. So this means that they draw water into the bowel. Fructo-oligosaccharides cannot be broken down in the human body because we lack the enzymes needed to do so. And so instead of us breaking the fructo-oligosaccharides down in the digestive tract, they pass into the large intestine fully intact, where they draw water into the bowel. And so this means that your poo also becomes a lot softer. And so if you have enough fructo-oligosaccharides, you will get what's known as osmotic diarrhea. Fructo-oligosaccharides also ferment very quickly in the colon, and the colon is basically the final part of the digestive tract, which extends from the small intestine to the rectum. So when the fructooligosaccharides make their way to the colon, the gut bacteria ferment it and produce gases, including carbon dioxide, but also the smelly gas which we are trying to minimize the production of in our body, hydrogen sulfide, which has chemical formula H2S. And so that is the gas. Hydrogen sulfide is the gas which makes your farts putrid, smelly and putrid. It gives your farts like an eggy, sulfuric, even salty, a little bit of a salty smell. And so that's why your farts reek when you eat these types of protein bars. So fructooligosaccharides, they simultaneously cause bloating and smelly farts in one. Double trouble. But when it comes to bloating, fructooligosaccharides aren't the only culprit. You've also got oats in the protein bars. These protein bars, which I'm talking about, they're actually called protein flapjacks. And flapjacks are made of oats. And so oats are high in carbs and fibers. Similar to fructooligosaccharides, fibers also cannot be digested by the human body. And so they simply just pass through the small intestine into the colon, where then again your gut bacteria ferment it and produce those gases. But unlike fructooligosaccharides, which are the nasty culprit in this case because they don't just cause bloating, they make your farts reek. Unlike fructooligosaccharides, the gases produced when you eat oats and when your body processes them, the gases produced, there's less hydrogen sulfide, but there's still the carbon dioxide, there's still the hydrogen gas, and there's still the methane inside of your body when your gut bacteria ferment the oats. When your gut bacteria ferment the fibers, because oats are fibers. Oats are high in fiber. Fibers don't tend to produce as much hydrogen sulfide. They'll still produce a little bit, but obviously nowhere near as much as the fructooligosaccharides do. So your farts aren't going to smell as bad, but you will still be bloated a lot. Either way, if you don't want to be playing the butt trumpet all the time, the best way to minimize the buildup of these gases is to basically minimize the edible substances that cannot be digested by the human body. Minimize your exposure to those. Minimize your exposure to the substances that are edible but cannot be broken down by the human body. Because if your body can't digest it, then your gut bacteria will take over and ferment it, producing these gases, smelly or not, which is still a pain in the ass if you've got constant bloating and you need to let one rip. It's a pain in the ass to have to do that, bruv. You don't want to, I don't know, maybe you're in class or at the workplace and you don't want to fumble your crush, which is totally fine. Declaring chemical warfare in the office. So just minimize your exposure to substances your body cannot digest. That's all you need to do. Hope you guys learned something. I mean, I know I did. I had to share the knowledge with you. So yeah, see you guys in the next video.